Hi, how are you doing? And a very warm evening to you. Welcome back to yet another short session with Kamil Nair. That's me, your life coach, psychotherapist, and a published author. It's my job to coach you to get better, and today's topic is just the beginning of a coaching session. It is ask and it shall be given. So true, isn't it? I read this line, some 6-7 years ago when I stumbled upon this book, which is called Ask and It Is Given. And it changed my perspective towards life. It's so important to ask, because if you don't ask, your demands, your wishes, your desires are all going to be unmet, and therefore it's very important to ask. So let's understand this topic today from these 4 perspectives, which is number 1, why is it so important to ask? Number 2, why do we so afraid of asking? Why don't we ask generally? And number 3, how do we ask? Well, I'm your coach, so I'm going to ensure that I take you through all of these pointers. So let's begin by understanding what happens or what is perceived of you when you ask. So if you always thought that if you asked, then you're going to be perceived as someone who is either too selfish or is out there to just meet his or her own desires, then you're wrong. Because every time you ask, you give out this message that you are a very confident and a strong person. You're assertive. And therefore, your self-esteem is very high. Because your self-esteem is so high, you know what is right for you. And you have the willpower to choose what is right for you and make that decision. And this is what you communicate to the person from whom you're setting your demands ahead. And therefore, you ask. Wow, lovely, isn't it? So this is how you're perceived. And if you thought otherwise, then quickly, please change all of those negative perceptions. Because asking actually makes you appear to be a very strong person, a very willed person, and a person who's very assertive. Now let's understand why is it so important to ask. First and the most important reason. If you don't ask, you're not going to get what you want. Period. If you want something, you have to go and ask or go after it. And the best way to go after it is to first ask for it if what you want rests in somebody else's hand. And 80% of what we desire depends on someone else. And therefore, it's important to ask. Now, another risk that we run is, if we don't ask, then we are not going to better our negotiation skills, which are so important in life. You are a good parent, you are a good worker, you are a good spouse, you are a good artist, simply because you're good at negotiations. And if you're not good in these areas, then it's practically because you have never actually paid close attention to your desires, your needs and your demands. And therefore, in order to begin your good negotiation skills, you have to start asking. Another important skill is that when you start asking, you improve your communication. You set your boundaries right. You let the other person know what your desires are and why it is so important. You also let the other person know what your needs are. And therefore, the chances of misinterpretation of your needs or your desires going unmet are very rare, and therefore it's important to ask. Now let's figure, why are we always so hesitant to ask? Before I get into that, let me tell you this. I actually came upon this topic because lately I'm coaching 2 or 3 people who have this topic in common. 2 of them are women and 1 is a gentleman. And all 3 of them have this problem. They have always been hesitant about asking what they want. And therefore, during the session, and as a coach, you ask a lot of intelligent questions. So you come to know about a lot of interesting things and the way a client thinks. And that's how I gained this perspective about why it becomes difficult for people to ask. You could be one of them. Sometimes we ask because we don't ask because we feel that my perception will change. Now, if you're a people pleaser, then yes, your perception is going to change. But you think being a people pleaser is a good thing? Food for thought, reflect upon this. Because asking doesn't change anybody's perception. It only changes your perception because you are then perceived as someone who is very strong-willed and a person who is very confident. And therefore, you should start asking. Point number 2. If you don't ask, like I said, you're not going to get what you want. And therefore, stop assuming that the person from whom you want some things already knows what you want. This can't happen. This assumption is pointless. And this especially applies to most women out there. Women mostly think that men need to know or need to understand what they want. But that doesn't work. As long as you are under this misconception your demands, desires are not going to be met. So it's very important to go all out and ask for what you want. And please, let's not assume that your husbands, your brothers, or the people that you live with have antennas on their head that they will catch a signal about what you want. That's not going to happen. And last but not the least, I've always seen working professionals tell me this. They tell me things like, well, I didn't get promoted because when I joined the organization 5 years ago, I had listed out all of my demands. Well, that was 5 years ago. Things change 5 days, things change in 5 months, things change in 5 weeks. Who remembers what happened 5 years ago or 2 years ago, or for that matter, even 1 year ago? I don't remember, and I'm sure you don't remember. So why will your colleagues or your seniors remember? And this whole conversation therefore becomes pointless. This conversation that you have with yourself, this mental dialogue, is pointless. And therefore it's important to overcome that. And the best way to overcome that is to start asking. So please don't be under the impression that it's going to cause a misconception about you. It's not. If you don't ask, you're not going to get what you want. So better to ask. Number 3, let's not assume that the person knows what we want and therefore we don't ask. Number 4, forget the time lags and just ask what you want when you want. Period. Now, let's understand how we get better at asking. Now, it's not a difficult skill. In fact, what I've learned in life is a skill can very, very easily be improved. Nobody is born by being an excellent negotiator or asker. If you want to be a good asker, then you have to start practicing. And the best way to start practicing is to first start identifying what you really want. So today, do this homework. Sit with a pen and paper and list down everything that you want and from whom you want this. Okay? And number 2 is, once you've identified what you want, from whom you want, you have to turn this into a very, very sweet, polite request and put it forward to the person who has this control to give you this demand or desire. And number 3 is to also list down all of those points very politely, very, very nicely about if your demand or desire is not met, then what is likely to happen. But all of this happens politely, sweetly, and assertively. Never, never, ever aggressively. So that's about it. If you did this, I'm certain you will start asking. And when you start asking, I'm 100% sure you will start receiving. Because ask and it is given. This is Kamil saying bye for now. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to drop me an email at coach@kamilnair.com. I also have an active website, which is www.kamilnair.com. Please feel free to visit it. Until then, remember to ask and do not worry about perceptions or assumptions. Just go all out and do what your heart tells you to. Bye-bye.